Hello everyone. I'm Mahima, as Rabia has introduced, and my co-author Ruchi Sharma. We are both research scholars at JNU. Today our topic of presentation is in Perennial Search for Home, a study of Afghan refugees in India. So I would like to start my presentation with one of our interviewees' reply when we asked about Afghan refugees. He says, when you uproot a rock from its place, its weight gets halved. So, to give you a brief background, India has had deep historical and cultural relations with Afghanistan going back centuries. In modern times, India has served as both a transit as well as a destination for Afghan refugees escaping war and political instability in Afghanistan. And according to UNHCR data, as of 2023, there are 19,338 Afghan refugees in India. There have been some studies on the experiences of Afghan refugees in India. However, they either focus on Afghan religious minorities such as Sikh and Hindus, or if they take Afghan refugee as a whole, they mostly deal with the political, legal or economic aspects of their experiences. And before moving forward, I would like to mention that this is a working paper, so any suggestions or insights are welcome. And through this study, we seek to develop into the ways in which Afghan refugees in India preserve their culture, their adaptive strategies, and the generational dimensions of the cultural identity. And our focus primarily is Muslim Afghan refugees. So the next part of our presentation addresses the theoretical underpinnings that have informed our research. Identity, as we all know, is a dynamic and evolving aspect of who we are. There are certain elements like place of birth, religion and gender which defines a person. And as a person ages, there are experiences, preferences and choices which adds to these elements and play a significant role in shaping our identity. Nicola Pratt, in her article, Identity, Culture and Democratization, the Case of Egypt, says, as a historical reservoir, culture is an important factor in shaping identity. So, there has been a fundamental change in the theorization of cultural identity. Previously, it was understood as static, given, which believes that it flows naturally or in isolation. However, this understanding has been revolutionized by scholars such as Franz Boas and Stuart Hall. They put forward an understanding of cultural identity which emphasized its complexities and its fluidity. They both argued that culture is not a fixed attribute, but rather a dynamic set of values, practices and beliefs that evolve over a time. Stuart Hall emphasizes how identities are formed and redefined through migration and displacement. He distinguishes between two types of cultural identity: the shared cultural heritage that connects an individual to his or her past, and the ongoing process of identity formation that reflects changes in the present, suggesting that identities are shaped by both nostalgia and adaptation. He highlights the way in which diasporic communities negotiate their identities, often blending elements from their original culture with those of their new environment. And in his article, Cultural Identity and Diaspora, he says that what we say is always in context. Thus, he emphasizes the importance of specific social, historical and cultural circumstances that shape our expression and identities. So, and as we are in an era of globalization, the understanding of cultural identity becomes much more complex. Harman and Campen suggest that globalization challenges the idea of static culture, resulting in a more hybrid and evolving understanding of identity. So, the understanding of cultural identity among immigrant groups, refugees and diaspora have mainly been studied through the theoretical underpinning of acculturation. Acculturation has been defined by various scholars. It highlights the complexities of cultural interaction, emphasizing that acculturation is not just about adopting new customs or culture, but involve a range of strategies and psychological adaptation in response to a cultural change. It illustrates how individuals and groups navigate their identities in an increasingly interconnected world. So, John W. Berry is a prominent Canadian psychologist and a leading figure in the field of cross culture psychology. He gives a fourfold model for acculturation. First, assimilation, which is like when individual or group choose not to maintain their original cultural identity and instead fully adopt the culture of the dominant society. Second, separation. It happens when an individual or group wish to retain their original culture and chose to avoid interactions with the dominant culture. Third is integration, when individual or group maintain aspects of their original culture while also actively engaging with the dominant culture. And the last is marginalization, which occurs when individual or groups neither maintain their original culture nor adopt the dominant culture. So the next slide is about the research methodology we have used. It is a qualitative study based on an in-depth interviews of Afghan refugees residing in Bhogal, which is also known as a mini Kabul, and Lajpat Nagar in New Delhi. And we took 10 interviews in the month of September and October this year, including one with a Sikh Afghan refugee. And now like the next presentation will be done by my co-author Ruchi.
Okay, so I'm Ruchi, as has already been mentioned. I will now take you through the findings and analysis of our research. All of our interviewees were well versed with their native languages. In most cases, it was seen that the younger generation of Afghan refugees who had spent most of their lives in India, they were the ones who could speak Hindi or English. In the cases where the older generation was bilingual, for instance, if they knew two Afghan languages, it was it was seen that the younger generation inherited only one of the two native tongues. So, for instance, we interviewed few people who knew both Pashto and Dari, and it was seen that their children only inherited Pashto. And the Sikh refugee that we interviewed, he could speak both Pashto and Hindko, but his children only inherited Hindko. Uh, Yeah, when now coming to the cultural events, when we speak of festivals, there are two main festivals that Afghan refugees in India celebrate, Eid and Nowruz. And as we know, there are two Eids. And on these festivals, they gather in Lodi Garden and the Simurg Center, which is a project by the Goethe Institute in New Delhi. Some Afghans wear their national dress on these festivals. So the way Afghan refugees in India celebrate their festivals has been adversely impacted by three factors. First is the deterioration in their economic capacity. So some of our interviewees reported that they don't even buy new clothes on Eid anymore. Second is the decline in their numbers. So, as mentioned, due to the unfavorable official policy of India towards refugees and the near impossibility of naturalization of Afghan Muslim refugees, Afghan refugees in India are constantly seeking to move out of the country. And the number of Afghan refugees that have moved out of India has exponentially increased after the Taliban takeover in 2021. So one of our interviewees mentioned that he had brought 2 kgs of sweets on Eid, but no one visited his place. The third reason is due to the Hindu majority nature of the host country. There are no extended holidays on festivals like Eid, unlike in Afghanistan. Some interviewees also mentioned that there are some festivals that were celebrated in Afghanistan, but which very few Afghan refugees in India celebrate these days. For instance, Shab-e Alda and Barat. Um, Speaking about Afghan refugee weddings in India, like festivals, they're also impacted by the decline in numbers of Afghan family members and their extended families, and also the economic deprivation that they face in India. All interviewees reported massively reduced numbers and extravagance in Afghan weddings in India. Some interviewees also reported that some rituals that are observed in weddings in Afghanistan are slowly being erased in Afghan weddings in India, such as the mirror tradition of where the bride and groom look into the mirror for the first time at their wedding, and the cake cutting ceremony that happens. There is also the influence of Indian culture when it comes to music, dance, and clothing. So women have now started. Some of the women have now started wearing Indian lehengas and suits and saris. And there are also some rituals from Indian weddings that have seeped into Afghan refugee weddings in India. For instance, the ring finding competition that happens between the bride and groom, and also the hage or dowry that is given from the bride's side to the groom's side. Uh, when we come to day cultural practices, speaking of clothing, all except one interviewee reported that they find it uncomfortable to wear their native Afghan clothing. And the primary reason for that is people look at them weirdly if they go out into the street wearing their native Afghan clothing. So instead of that, they mostly wear Indian or Western clothing. There is also an economic reason behind that because some of our interviewees mentioned that the Afghan national dress is very expensive to buy or secure in India. And also, it is uncomfortable to wear in the hot Indian climate. Coming to food, all interviewees reported that they completely retain the Afghan style food in their day-to-day life, and they find Indian food spicy. Afghan localities, such as the ones in Bhogal and Lajpat Nagar that we visited, they have plenty of restaurants and shops that sell Afghan foods, breads, and other Afghan snacks. And these shops and restaurants are mostly owned by Afghans themselves. When it comes to dance, our interviewees reported that they do perform Atan and Kathakali at communal gatherings. There are some dance forms that they used to perform, or their older generations used to perform in Afghanistan, which are not practiced anymore in India. For instance, Chorbazi. One interviewee mentioned that, I quote, "If we don't engage in our dance, we would get into depression." It was also seen that the younger generation of Afghan refugees are slowly losing touch from their native dance forms. For instance, one interviewee of ours reported that she's more inclined towards Bollywood dance for lack of exposure to the native Afghan dance forms. When we speak of the feeling of home and belongingness, all of our interviewees, despite a massive downgrade in their standard of living in India, they have retained the quintessentially Afghan ways of designing their home. So they have like decorated their homes with kaleen, sarando, and rugs, and they still eat on the dastarkhan. And most of them have kept Afghan flags in their homes. Some of them have kept it alongside Indian flags. Some have kept maps or naksha of Afghanistan. Some also reported having kept photos of their native places like Kandahar, Kabul, Bamiyan, etc. on their walls, while others have kept portraits of political figures like Dr. Najib, Ahmad Masood. Uh, Even the Afghan restaurants that we visited, they have also retained the quintessential Afghan seating style. So uh, we can see in this slide that there are rugs on the wall. This Afghan seating style is there, and this like the Afghan flag is kept alongside the Indian flag, which is a common sight when you go to Afghan restaurants or shops in Delhi. There are also cultural get-togethers that happen. So, like in continuation of the Afghan practice of Mela Raftan, Afghan refugees in New Delhi, every Sunday they go for picnics to Lodi Garden and Sundar Nursery. There is a Simurg Center in Delhi, which is a project of the Goethe Institute, which regularly hosts cultural get-togethers for and by Afghan refugees in Delhi, which include weekly or bi-weekly open mics for poetry, book reading events with books in Pashto and Dari classes for kids, script writing, and so on. The center also began an Afghan cultural festival last year, which is called Jashne Noor. And this year, when it happened, we had the pleasure of visiting Jashn-e-Noor, and it displayed Afghan clothing, rugs, henna making, knitting, jewelry, calligraphy. There were also like fortune-telling tradition called Fale Hafiz, and Afghan musical performances and food. Um, these are some pictures from the festival, so we can see the display of Afghan rugs, Afghan national dress. These are some paintings that were made. Uh, yeah, so here we can see that Afghan food was being served, and these are Afghan jewelry, and these are kids reading Pashto and Dari books. Yeah, this is another picture from that festival. So, coming to our analysis, when we apply the framework of acculturation to the Afghan refugee experience in India, we observe that the model of integration is not applicable. Integration is defined as some degree of when some degree of cultural integrity is maintained, while at the same time, the members of an ethno-cultural group seek to participate as an integral part of the larger social network. So this is primarily because Afghan refugees in India don't really view India as a destination. Instead, they see it as a layover until they find home either back in Afghanistan or in another country, mostly a Western country which has a more favorable refugee policy, which is mostly the case nowadays, especially after the takeover of Taliban. Even after they have spent years in India, so there were interviewees who have spent 15 years, even 40 years in India, but they were still not not looking at India as like as their final stop. They were still seeking to move outside of India if possible. And their adaptation strategies like learning Hindi or sometimes and yeah, like just to mention that the fact that they look at India as a layover and not as a destination, the reason for it can be attributed to the near impossibility of securing nationalization in India, and also the unfavorable and like legal hurdles that the refugees have to face in India. So the adaptation strategies like learning Hindi or sometimes engaging with Indian culture are driven either by necessity or simply to seek joy without an attempt to be part of the native culture. Their politico cultural identity as Afghans is strongly intact. It was also seen that in many cases, Afghan refugees have linked their which can be seen with the restaurants, grocery shops selling Afghan food, travel agencies facilitating travel to Afghanistan, business of Afghan rugs, jewelry, and so on. There is also a generational difference in the memories and idea of belongingness in Afghan refugees. The younger generation, especially those who have spent most of their formative years in India, do not have a firm grasp over Afghan history, cultural practices, and places. One of our interviewees, who was like 16 years old and she came to India when she was really young, she mentioned that a friend of hers asked her when Afghanistan got its independence, and she could not even like immediately answer that. So she was like elaborating on the fact that she's slowly forgetting very basic facts about Afghan history and cultural practices because she does not have that physical connection with Afghanistan, and she does not have so many memories also of the place, barring some vague memories when she was very small. Um, there are also legal and cultural differences in the experience of Afghan refugees in India based on their religious identity. Afghan Sikh and Hindu refugee experience is easier with regard to ease of visa access and religio-cultural environment. And after 2021, the government of India prioritized evacuating and naturalizing Afghan Sikh and Hindu refugees. And this kind of political discrimination was also seen in the controversial 2019 Citizenship Amendment Act, which promised protection to persecuted minorities in India's neighboring countries, including Afghanistan. But that act specifically excluded Muslim asylum seekers.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much for listening to us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to us.